Well, when I was in seminary, I was serving at a little church in Ohio that had a tradition of doing a living nativity scene outdoors during the Christmas season. And since I was in charge of the youth ministry, that was kind of our thing to do. And the deal was that the kids would volunteer for 2-hour shifts sitting out in a makeshift barn that we built out of old boards. We had the whole crew there, Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the wise men. We even had some live animals. We had donkeys and sheep. We even had some beautiful Christmas music pumped in over a loudspeaker. And the idea was that people would just sort of drive through and they could roll down their windows and sort of catch the whole essence of the nativity. It was on a main road, so it was a great idea. But every year something went wrong. And I'm not saying really wrong, but just something that made it, well, less than the postcard image of the nativity that we often see. For example, a couple of years before I came to the church, they actually had a live camel there for the nativity. Except one of the nights, the camel died about an hour before the performance. So they had to cancel the performance, and then the question was, what do you do with the dead camel? Who do you call? There's no dead camel removal service. I don't know how they did that. The first year that I took over, there was a misty 50 or 35 degree rain falling that whole first weekend. So just, barely cold. It was cold, but not cold enough to snow, just drizzle. And we decided to go ahead with it anyway. So the youth piled on the layers underneath their costumes. So when you looked at the scene, you got this idea that the now rotund Mary and Joseph could have each afforded to lose a few pounds. The wise men should have walked a little more on their journey as they waddled up to the manger. Not exactly what you put in a postcard. Also, while everybody else was bundled up, baby Jesus was laying in the manger just wearing a cloth diaper. Silent night, freezing night. And then there was a time that, we're going through this, and one of the Marys, we had a couple different Marys to swap out, and she came up to me one evening and said, Pastor Bob, what are we supposed to do out there? I mean, we're just staring at the baby, and that's cool and all, but, well, this might be sacrilegious to say, but it's kind of boring. And now, Jennifer and I did not have children at this point, so I told her to ask her mom what it is that new mothers do when their baby is first born. A little while later, she came back, and I said, well, what did your mom say? She said, well, Mom said that I should hold the baby for a while and then take a handful of painkillers and go to sleep while Joseph makes phone calls. Thanks a lot, Mom, for that advice. Try as we might, we could never get the perfect nativity scene. But the more Christmases that I'm a part of, the more I realize it's this imperfection, it's this reality, this messiness that is really the heart of the Christian message. It's the message that Charles Wesley gets at with this second verse of the wonderful Christmas carol we just sang a little bit ago, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. Last week we talked about the original title, Hark How All the Welkin Rings, that the birth of Jesus caused the whole cosmos to ring with joy because it signaled the beginning of our redemption and the reconciliation of humanity and God and all creation. In the second verse, Wesley goes a little bit deeper to express the powerful mystery of the incarnation, that the Christ who is proclaimed by angels is also God in the flesh. Christ by highest heaven adored, Christ the everlasting Lord. Late in time, behold him come, offspring of the Virgin's womb. Veiled in flesh the Godhead see. Hail the incarnate deity, pleased with us in flesh to dwell. Jesus our Emmanuel. So Wesley's poetically kind of pulling together the strings of all the gospel stories about the birth of Jesus. Now, if we go back to Genesis and we look at the beginning of Genesis as God creating a temple, an earthly temple where he is going to dwell, he's going to rest on the seventh day. And by the way, little commercial, we're going to be doing a series in Genesis starting in January that's going to take us all the way through Lent. So you're going to want to sign up for that. But here's a little preview that this whole idea of God dwelling with us is all the way back there from the beginning. But it's a choice of God to enter into our human mess. Matthew and Luke both give us birth narratives of Jesus. Both are kind of messy. I mean, think about Matthew's version. You have Mary and Joseph, and they're engaged, but Mary's suddenly pregnant, and we get it from Joseph's perspective. In Matthew, Joseph's like, I'm not sure what to do with this because, this is kind of embarrassing. It's going to embarrass us, and it's very dangerous for her. So maybe we should just try to make this go away quietly. But an angel comes to Joseph and says, no, this mess is part of the deal. And Joseph takes it on, and he's going to protect the baby and the mother and take them off to Egypt when Herod the Great wants to kill off all the babies of Bethlehem because he hears that a rival king has been born. And then we have Luke's story that the child was born in a barn, probably not a separate barn, but probably a cave in the back of the house where they kept the animals. Back in those days, one of the things you would do is keep the animals close so that they could warm the house, keep them on the bottom floor or in the back of the house to warm the place. But the problem is that it's not a sanitary place. It's not the hospital. And the shepherds were first to visit him. If you wanted people to come and say, can I hold the baby? These are the last people you'd want to do it, covered with sheep stuff, kind of there in this place. It's a messy thing. Now, Mark, in his Reader's Digest version of the gospel, you notice he doesn't have a birth narrative. He kind of plunges right in to the good news about Jesus, and he reveals a grown-up Jesus getting right to work, entering into the messiness of human life. But John takes a different tack altogether. John reminds us that if others are describing the mess, we have to understand the message within that mess. John wants us to be reminded that God has always been about engaging the messiness of humanity. John begins the gospel with, in the beginning, which takes us right back to the creation story, when God got his hands dirty creating the world and then making human beings out of the dust of the earth. Notice, though, that he does all of this simply with a word. God speaks, and what he speaks becomes the reality. Here in John's gospel, God speaks again, but his word is not merely another word. It's not a recommendation. It's not a set of rules. It's not a treatise on how to be nicer to people. It's a word become flesh. God does not primarily reveal himself even in a book, though the Bible is the vital story. God reveals himself in a person. God reveals himself in Jesus Christ, one who is fully human as well as fully divine. In Jesus' humanity, God identifies with us in a very personal and powerful way. Well, of course, we know the baby in the manger grows up and he walks the earth. He walks as we walk. He learned as we learn. He laughed. He played. He skinned his knees. He made jokes. I imagine him leaving doors open in the house on purpose so that when Mary yelled out, "Would you close that door? What, were you born in a barn?" Jesus could say, "Yes, yes, I was." Like us, he probably got sick every once in a while. He loved people. He hung out with friends. He loved a good party. He challenged authority. He worked with his hands. He made a living. To top it off, he was falsely accused. He was beaten, crucified, made a bloody mess by the very people he came to be with. As Paul puts it in Philippians 2, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Surely God could have chosen a different and more dignified way of revealing his love toward us. But then again, maybe not. For the reality of Christmas is that God is not a distant, sanitized deity who dispenses judgment from on high. An old man in a long beard, like that Far Side cartoon where God is simply waiting, to push the smite button on his computer, ready to drop a piano on our heads when we're bad. Instead, the story teaches us that God is really quite close, quite accessible, willing to get into our messes. A God who knows how we feel, who hurts when we hurt, who feels joy when we feel joy, who knows what it's like to have everyone against you, who loves us up close and personal, like a parent holds a child. See, in Jesus, God became one of us, to be in relationship with us, to laugh with us, and to cry with us, to teach us, hold us, challenge us, even die for us. Indeed, he became like one of us so we could become like one of him. We could become one with him and be like him. This is the beautiful reality that Charles Wesley conveys in this powerful verse, which is taken right from the scriptures. God's ultimate word is revealed in the midst of human life, a life where messes are sacred things, where we can see new possibilities, where we can break old patterns, a life where we spend each day walking hand in hand with God, and we continue writing out the greatest story ever told with our lives. John reveals that Jesus is the true Emmanuel, God with us. He comes to us in the midst of our imperfection, and he loves us with a perfect love. He understands that in the mess is where the true message is. The real good news is best known in those strange and broken parts of life. God comes to be with us in person. My favorite illustration of this comes from our own house. When our daughter Hannah was little, this was probably her second Christmas, she had quite an imagination, and she liked to put together stories for her toys. Now, I'm going to preface this. I'm authorized to tell this story if and only if, when she comes home for Christmas, you don't tell her how cute it is, okay? All right? Are you with me here? Okay. Well, we have this wooden nativity set in our house that we got when we were first married, and it's very chunky. It's a big wooden nativity set, and no small parts for a child to get hold of. So we thought, well, great, we're going to put this under the Christmas tree. And there it sat for a couple of weeks, and we were admiring it. And one day, though, I'm sitting on the couch, and I noticed that everything's in place where it's supposed to be. You got the shepherds, you got the angels, you got the wise men, you got Mary and Joseph, but Mary and Joseph are staring at an empty manger. The baby Jesus is gone. Just gone. Clearly snatched from the manger on purpose. So I started looking everywhere, because what's a manger scene without the star, right? So I looked under the furniture, I looked in the toy box. I even looked inside the VCR, which is a very old sentence, but things would wind up in there. That was the cave that she liked to put things in. No Jesus. I looked for a whole day whenever I had the chance, but Jesus had flown the coop. Well, in the evening, after Hannah was tucked into bed, I started to straighten up the room where her toys were, when I noticed Hannah's little Fisher-Price bus. Remember the Fisher-Price bus with the little Fisher-Price people, all the smiling Fisher-Price people? You got the smiling bus driver, the smiling construction worker, the smiling mom, the smiling businessman, even the smiling dog. And when I picked up the bus to put it away, I noticed that someone else was inside, and it was the smiling baby Jesus. Smiling with the rest of the smiling people. It was then I knew that this was the perfect image of the incarnation. Little child shall lead them. Jesus doesn't simply stay in the manger, aloof from real life. Instead, he hangs out on the bus with all the rest of the peeps. Hannah seemed to know that's where he belonged, with the people, with us. Reminded me of the chorus of that Joan Osborne song that came out the year before Hannah was born. Remember this song? What if God was one of us, just a slob like one of us, just a stranger on the bus, trying to make his way home? The answer, of course, is that God was one of us. But I wanted to say to Joan that his goal was never to make his way home, but to make his home with us. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It was messy. It was not easy. It was painful. But the gift of Christmas is that we know that the God of the universe knows us because he has walked with us. I don't know what mess you're in today, but I do know that there is no mess that God cannot enter because he's already done so. And he's done it for you and me. In him, you discover the truth about God, a God who loves you, who cares for you, who forgives you, who wants to make you whole. That's what the incarnation means. Veiled in flesh, the Godhead see. Hail the incarnate deity. In him we give our glory and praise today. Like our daughter taught me, he didn't come to be set aside, admired in some lovely tableau postcard scene. He's not confined to the manger or to churches or to stained glass. He is the God who gets on the bus and invites us to join him there. So, will you bring your mess and get on board? That's what Christmas is.